You could be forgiven early in your Tacticus career for being a little confused as to what to build for guild raids. As it is one of the most consistently rewarding game modes available, having a competitive raid team will obviously be a primary concern to anyone who wants to reap the benefit of those rewards, as well as the other perks of being able to join a better guild, given that competitive guilds will base entry criteria on raid performance over and above anything else most of the time. There is up-to-date information available on what the established meta choices against different bosses are, but presumptions are baked into these recommendations that mean they often do not apply to a real player. Simply being presented with the best possible team for a fight is of no use to someone who is in no way close to having the needed characters built sufficiently, or even unlocked or unlockable outside of requisitions in the first place. Perhaps guild raids are not their sole focus, and if they want to build strong characters, they want ones that will help them to perform in other game modes besides raids, whereas the raid meta choices may only be good for one thing. Asmodai, as part of the Asmodai/Forecast duo, being but one example of this, where Asmodai is not really a first, second, third, fourth, or even 100th choice for anything otherwise. The raid meta suggestions, such as those given in Pants of Horus Infographics, present an ideal goal for the particular moment in time when they're made, but someone attempting to build up their team from nothing might find that by the time they have the requisite best characters built, the raid meta has left them behind. It is a crying shame to build up a character only for them to be rendered obsolete, and this is one of the follies of trying too hard to chase the raid meta early on in your Tacticus career. I should know, I've fallen victim to it when too enthusiastically trying to unlock the now irrelevant Malgra back in the before times when he was the guild raid king. Here you can see that I have invested essentially no resources into leveling him, he's stone 1, despite unlocking him over a year ago, and I have no intention of ever doing so barring some huge meta shift in the future. Assuming I only acquired his shards through the guild shop, that's not entirely true but it's close enough, you can see that I missed out on buying 175 Codices of War by farming him out. If that's a bit abstract for you, it's enough experience to get one character more or less all the way to level 49, or a little over 8 characters to level 35, i.e. enough to get them to Gold 1. A terrible, terrible waste that still makes me wince thinking about it. Looking at a couple of old infographics from Nandi shows just how much the guild raid meta can change in a short time period. The later infographic actually undersells just how good the new Adeptus Mechanicus characters were compared to the old meta at the time, and the difference is even bigger than you can see, but I won't ramble on as to why, as it probably won't mean much to anyone this video would help. Granted, Mechanicus' introduction was a seismic shift in the established raid meta, but even without such a huge change, things fairly often get shaken up by single character releases such as that of Trajan. With all this in mind, it might seem silly, but my first recommendation regarding which raid team to build is to not build one at all. This isn't to say that you should build any old crap character and throw them at a raid boss whilst expecting a free ride from your guild, but it's more of a reassurance that there are plenty of decently performing raid characters that you will need to build to progress through essential content, elite campaigns in other words, where the best characters are referred to as carries. These characters perform well enough for you to pull your weight in raids when you are still at a relatively low level, so you can do your part as you grow and save worrying about the raid meta and how to pursue it for as late as possible. This will minimise the possibility of sinking a ton of resources into a character like Malgra that has no use outside of its niche in raids, and then having them be left behind, making upgrading them and unlocking them utterly pointless. I suppose I'll technically be recommending you to build a multi-hit team here, one of the few main meta guild raid team archetypes, the others being the mechanical raid team, the neurophrobe team, and a variation on multi-hit using Adeptus Custodes characters. You will find, however, that the beginner-friendly characters I recommend bear little resemblance to those involved in multi-hit teams at the very highest levels of play. I'm showing the most recent Pants of Horus infographic on the topic of top meta multi-hit raid teams, and if I don't explain it a bit, you may come back to this and think I'm contradicting myself, as I will be recommending several characters that are featured heavily in this infographic. Now, this infographic serves to reinforce the points I've made and will be making later, as the aforementioned characters are no longer the best choices in most, if not all, of these cases, which again goes to show just how fast the top raid meta can change, considering that this graphic is just 3 months old. It also goes to show that I'm not talking out of my arse, I hope, with my recommendations, as despite them not being the best right now, they still perform well enough to the point where they were considered meta until very recently. All of this raises the question as to how far you should upgrade my recommended picks before transitioning to a more endgame team, to avoid overinvesting in stuff that ultimately won't make the cut in any of your ultimate raid teams. Now, outside of the Samhan and Indomitus Mirror Elite campaigns, having your carry characters at Gold 1 is enough to get you reasonably far, if not all the way through Elite campaigns. Again, the Pants of Horus Infographics, there's another series of these available on the Tacticus Discord, and if you're unsure as to what the campaign carries are for each campaign. I think the characters that they choose as carries are all correct, though in my opinion they recommend building non-carries too high. I would not recommend building the painfully mediocre Snapper Wrecker and Gibber Scraps to Gold 1 as they do, for example. Now this is a little aside, but I'll link the video I'm showing in a comment and in my script. It demonstrates the possibility of completing Octarius Elite essentially without any upgrades on Gibber and Snapper at all, for those who really want to trim the fat when it comes to upgrading characters. You may not quite be able to see it here, but Gibber Scraps is, I think, Iron 2 and Snapper is Stone 3. And they didn't need to be taken any further than that to complete the entirety of the Octarius Elite campaign. Anyway, back to the main topic. Gold 1 is, in my opinion, quite a good place to stop upgrading a lot of your carries for a couple of reasons. First of all, going above Gold 1 requires ascending a character from Epic to Legendary, which entails acquiring 250 shards and 10 Legendary orbs for that character, on top of what's required to get them to Epic. This is both time and energy consuming without luck from requisitions, not to mention the short supply of Legendary orbs early on, and so it is worth seriously appraising whether you want to take a character to the next level. If they've served their early game purpose, they can wait or be left completely. By this point, you may also have played long enough to accumulate some decent characters to carry your campaigns outside of the mandatory ones. Oftentimes, mandatory characters are pretty mediocre, if not downright bad, and the more you can do to avoid upgrading them, the better. In my personal experience, these are screenshots from my own game. I completed the entirety of the Indomitus and Fall of Cadia Mirror Elite campaigns with Certus and Sybil, both Iron 2, out of pure spite for their banality and general uselessness, employing Adeptus Mechanicus characters as my carries, and Isabella occasionally, to shield their worthless behinds from death. Even the carry characters of campaigns are not exempt from harsh appraisal. This may be quite a controversial opinion, but I don't find Bellator to be a character worthy of heavy investment. I have 15 characters at Diamond 3 and have never felt the need to take him above Gold 2. I'd actually be fine with having him at Gold 1, there's functionally no difference between the two from my perspective, and I'll expand on this point later. Less controversially, Archimetos is considered to be one of the carries of the Fall of Cadia Elite campaign, but you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who streamlines their roster recommending he be upgraded beyond Gold 1, at least until we see how his rework goes. Investing into Rotbone, Maladus, Abraxas, or if you're lucky, Khan, to be your non-mandatory carry or carries, will be better for you in the long run in terms of roster development than trying to bulldoze your way through all of Fall of Cadia Elite, relying primarily on your Black Legion trio, as those 4 characters that I just mentioned are more broadly useful. I just want to touch on the Khan thing now that I've mentioned it. As I've said, committing to a long, expensive grind for a legendary character early on means taking a big risk of your efforts being wasted unless it's for a really good character. Now, in my opinion, Khan is an excellent character and probably a safer bet than most to stay in the meta for a long time, for guild raids, but it's still hard to recommend the diversion of resources required to unlock him, especially via the War Shop, when war credits could instead be spent on Rotbone, an extremely important healer. Nevertheless, if you are lucky via requisition pools and manage to unlock Khan that way, I would 100% recommend leveling him up, given that the horrible 500 shard grind has been removed as a barrier to progress. The same applies to other strong legendary characters such as Ragnar. Don't be afraid to use them if you get them, just because they're not a core campaign character, and I won't be recommending them specifically in this video. Anyway, instead of listing everything you should ignore, which is a very long list indeed, I'll give recommendations of characters you do well to build, which instead is a relatively short list, thankfully. Now, the fundamental spirit of the team they'll form is to use characters that deal a lot of hits, and make use of at least one buffer that boosts damage per hit to massively increase the damage output of the team overall. It doesn't hurt if the hits from the characters themselves do a good chunk of damage either. As well as characters that deal tons of hits, summoners also provide value by the damage that their spawns can add when attacking a boss, and also in how they might be able to tackle the boss's own minions, either by killing them or drawing fire away from the rest of your team, or both. It's a nice bonus if the summoners fit the theme of the team, i.e. having lots of hits and providing buffs, as well as fulfilling their primary role as a summoner, and some summoners are much better than others in this regard. With these things in mind, I will recommend some characters in no particular order to build that are perennially useful, campaign required, easily acquired, and have at minimum good low-level raid performance. I know that I am dating this video by suggesting specific characters to build. Even though I'm confident that they will remain good investments for the foreseeable future, I have laid out a list of useful characters that you can apply to... useful characteristics that you can apply to new character releases as a guide to judging whether they're worth investing into early on. Some are a little vague, but I didn't want to get too far into the details about stuff that won't be relevant for raids, which is my main focus here. Just know that despite me not mentioning repairs, healing, or the ability to kill multiple enemies per turn, that doesn't mean that these are not useful character traits. They're just bundled into more nebulous categories like powerful in multiple game modes. Boss and Snotflogger are just given here as quick examples of characters that meet a lot of my criteria, but I'll now move on to looking at characters individually in more detail. For each character I talk about, any of the good characteristics they don't possess will be greyed out. So, now for my early raid character recommendations. First of all, Snotflogger. Now, Snotflogger is not campaign required, but there are so few difficult 3-man missions in the Octarius campaign, both the normal and elite versions, that he can be considered a de facto core campaign character. In a nutshell, he's a tough melee brawler that deals heavy damage against light to medium armoured enemies relative to his level, a summoner, and a character that can perform many hits per attack, 5 minimum or 7 maximum, depending on whether you trigger his Get Stuck In trait, plus also one more hit from his passive summon. In Tacticus, being able to flood the map with summons is often extremely powerful due to the propensity of enemy unit AI to prioritise attacking weak summons over strong characters, keeping your characters alive for longer. Not only is Snot capable of summoning in many grots at once with his active ability, up to 6, though realistically 3 or 4 is good, but the summons themselves are capable of replicating when at full health. Left unchecked, they can multiply out of control and spell serious trouble for anyone who ignores them, on top of the annoyance of them taunting their targets for a turn when they're first spawned in by Snot. Snot's passive also summons a grot every time he attacks, up to a maximum of 5 on the map simultaneously. While this can be detrimental in raids occasionally if grots start blocking your way to high ground, it can be worked around and does wonders for distracting enemy AI, and even blocking boss movement if you really know what you're doing. Where grots are summoned relative to an enemy that Snot attacks is based on logic and is not random, so if you can figure that out, you'll be doing good. Just as a general rule, summons like to be spawned on high ground or on safe hexes, safe being in trenches or tall grass and not on barbed wire or flames, for example. Now, Snots and Boss Golgorts, the other orc that I'll be mentioning in this video, they are leagues apart from the rest of the orcs in terms of how much better they are, but they're different enough from one another for there to be value in building both for variety's sake. Whilst Boss shines brightly for one turn before dropping down to being a middling threat on his own, Snotflogger can be a consistent threat to anything he faces that lacks high armour over the course of a protracted battle, and is also able to summon infinite times, making him an asset in game modes where you face hordes of enemies. If Snot kills his primary target with his attack, his summons can attack another adjacent target, potentially allowing him to kill 2 opponents per turn, multi-killing being an extremely valuable ability in legendary release events or LREs. Another augmentation to his damage output is his Beast Slayer trait, which allows him to deal plus 20% damage to big targets and vehicles. As all main raid bosses are considered to be either big targets, vehicles, or both, this amounts to a permanent 20% damage buff against them. Just be wary that this damage multiplier is applied to your attacks after the armor of your opponent is taken into consideration and subtracted from his damage stat, so it will not help you to punch through armor. See the article HDTW, which is short for How Does That Work? damage on the Tacticus wiki if you want a more in-depth understanding of how that works. And the final cherry on top of Snotflogger's cake is that you can farm up to 4 of his shards daily from doing salvage runs, not even considering the extra salvage run tokens you get from leveling up. And so Snot is exceedingly easy to promote and ascend without having to spend energy or onslaughts on farming his shards. And that's all I have to say for Snot, so let's move on. Boss Golgots. Boss is the hardest of my recommended characters to unlock, being a natural epic, but is well worth the effort. You also do get 80 of his shards in a scripted requisition pool, so it's not too bad. You still need 170 shards on top of that, but yeah, could be worse. Now, he is campaign required to start off with, and is one of just 2 characters necessary to be built to breeze through not only the Octarius base campaign, but also the elite one. His active ability is where he really shines, summoning in 2 hard-hitting orc boys, buffing all other orcs on the battlefield, and also characters of any other faction that are adjacent to him for 1 turn. The bonus movement, melee damage, and melee hit provided by this ability can give you a massive edge over tougher teams in normal arena or any other PvP type mode, where it may transform even low-ranked melee units into killing machines, as long as Golgot's active is over-leveled relative to the enemy. If you are able to trigger his Get Stuck In trait, he is able to score 3 hits per base attack and 4 hits via his passive. If you're using Eldrron as a buffer, as I will be recommending, Eldron's Doom debuff will only grant bonus damage to the 3 hits from his normal attack, so Boss isn't the best as a multi-hitting character, but his 2 summons dealing 2 hits each make up for this to an extent. It's not like his passive does no damage without the buff either, unless the enemy has really high armor, in which case its low base damage and 15% pierce leaves a lot to be desired. Whilst not an endgame character for multi-hit teams, he is not bad by any stretch, even when compared to the very best, and he does have a lot of value in the mechanical raid team, to the point where he is a good candidate for taking to Diamond 3 with a level 50 active over there. A big positive for him when it comes to the mechanical team is that it relies on mechanical summons to function well, and those summons are easily distracted by summons that a raid boss is able to bring into the fight. Now, your summons act in the order in which they're spawned, so by using Golgot's active early in the fight, you can ensure that his boys will be your first summons to react to anything that the enemy boss can bring along, which makes keeping your other summons focused on attacking the boss more easy. They won't be running off all over the map trying to kill termagants or ripper swarms or what have you. On top of this, his passive ability allows him to attack twice in 1 turn, which enables him to trigger the passive ability of Exit a Row twice per turn, which is great as it's the primary source of damage for the mechanical raid team, and most characters can only trigger it once per turn or not at all. Even if you don't plan to run the mechanical team, his ability to perform 2 attacks per turn makes him great in horde modes such as LREs, where killing lots of enemies fast is the name of the game. Now LREs, again, that is short for Legendary Release Events. If you combine his multi-killing ability with his high base armor and health, his dependable damage, long range, ability to equip a block item and block booster, his summons, and his big target trait providing protection to surrounding characters, and Boss is quite a force to be reckoned with in LREs, and really any game mode in general. You can't go wrong with Boss. Moving on from him, we have Eldrron. Eldrron is required for the Saimhan campaign, and also carries it thanks to his minor splash damage and significant buff he provides to the damage output of his allies. It is this buff that makes him such a good fit for your beginner multi-hit team, as it is very easy to apply effectively to a boss. All you need to do is stand him 2 hexes from it. Eldrron used to be the king of buffers in guild raids, but has since been largely eclipsed in the top meta by more specialised buffers such as Vitruvius, Dante, Helbrecht, and Trajan. One thing you'll notice about all the buffers I just mentioned, however, is that they are legendaries, making them a lot harder to acquire in comparison to Eldrron, and you shouldn't put off building Eldrron in favour of one of these just because he'll have to be replaced one day. The game makes it even easier to acquire Eldrron by providing you with 80 of his shards in a scripted requisition drop early in the game, so farming 50 of his shards for his unlock is all that's necessary, unlike 500 for a legendary. The bonus damage per hit he provides is still excellent, 898 damage at level 50. There are now just a couple of bosses where he's completely unviable to be used, the Avatar of Cain and Magnus. Early on in your raid career, you won't have to worry about fighting these bosses so much, as they only start to appear high up in the epic boss tiers. Another thing that brings Eldrron down compared to these other buffers is that his buff cannot increase ability damage, but outside of the passive attack of boss Golgorts, this is not an issue that concerns any of the other characters I have mentioned or will mention here. The Simhan Elite campaign is significantly difficult without either Janezar or Malgra to back up your free core characters, and I can't recommend farming and or building either of them just for the sake of completing the campaign, as neither are particularly great. I think a good course of action to take is to build Eldrron up to roughly Diamond 1 level, where he'll be able to provide your early raid team a good buff via his passive, and also carry the campaign, again without the need for Malgra or Janezar. By the time you're able to build him to this point, you'll probably be able to move on to using top meta raid teams not too long after, and start using the more specialised buffers. Given that the top meta teams rely heavily on Imperial characters, you won't feel the loss of the badges you invest into Eldron's passive too keenly. That's all I have to say for Eldrron. Bellator. He is a character that shines early on against bosses with low armour and without complex anti-summon mechanics, which constitutes the various iterations of Tyranids and Ghazghkull you'll face early on. His main draws are that he is mobile, easily obtainable, a carry for the Indomitus Elite campaign, tough and hard to wear down due to his Gravis armour, and he summons in tough Inceptors that also sport Gravis armour, with both him and his summons possessing a high hit count of 6. When boosted by Eldron's Doom, the multitude of hits that he and his summons are able to dish out can handily tear through a boss's health pool. This is improved by his passive ability, which causes Inceptors adjacent to him to attack when he does, adding up to an additional 12 hits on a boss whenever he attacks it. His passive ability also increases their attack damage, making him a minor buffer, but generally it is seen as pretty lackluster as far as buffs go, and ignorable if you are hard up for Imperial badges. Him being able to spawn a lot of bodies around the boss can also be useful if you want to lock it in place, especially if you trap it in a vulnerable low ground position. While Bellator's tough summons and his Gravis armour hold him in good stead in modes such as LREs, where you're expecting to take a lot of attrition from weak targets, he really falls off in other areas of the game past a certain point. As you get higher through the raid boss roster, you'll find that Bellator only really has a place amongst the top dogs against Ghazghkull, and he may even be dethroned from that role by the development of a Custodes meta. The reasons for this are manifold. It takes too long for him to be able to perform a good summon due to it charging up slowly with no way of speeding it up. His summons are easily distracted permanently by boss summons/adds due to their pathetically low damage combined with weak armour penetration. The Inceptors spawn randomly around their target and thus add an unwanted degree of unpredictability to fights. They tend to hog high grounds that would be better occupied by characters unless you anticipate boss movement perfectly. New bosses tend to have high armour and anti-summon mechanics that new to him and his summons, and he doesn't deal a huge amount of damage without the help of his summons. You may see people suggesting to develop him to Diamond quite frequently, but Gold 1 is a fine place for him to stay once you're done with Indomitus Elite, in my opinion. Even in LREs where he performs well, there are enough characters that share traits of him and are more valuable at endgame, such as Isabella, Titus, Aleph, Ravas and Actus, to the point where he ends up being somewhat redundant. As a campaign carry, you'll still want to build him before the likes of Titus, Ravas, Actus and maybe Isabella, and he will serve you well for a time. Don't take away from this that I think he is bad, he just essentially has no niches where he performs best. Moving on to Aleph Null. Aleph Null is a real gem of a character. She has a moderately high hit count of 5, provides repairs both manually and through her passive ability, which can be vital in modes where endurance is key, such as LREs and survival. She's a campaign carry, and spawns summons that deal up to 5 hits and can multiply, meaning she pairs very well with Eldrron as an early multi-hit raid character. As the complexity of bosses increases beyond that of the humble Hive Tyrant and Tervigon, however, almost all of them have means of punishing the use of Scarabs, usually in the form of an attack that deals at least 5 hits and is aimed at killing swarm-type units. Aleph can still be used as part of a mechanical raid team due to the ability of her and her mechanical summons to trigger X to Rose passive attack, which again is the main source of damage for the team, but this often ends up becoming very convoluted due to the need to work around the ubiquitous anti-swarm mechanics of bosses. Scarabs can also work against you if you do not tightly control or anticipate the movement of bosses, as they happily steal available high ground hexes to attack bosses from, due to the fact that they get to move before your characters, and like high ground as it maximises the damage that they are able to deal as an individual unit. Once a summon entrenches itself on a high ground position, it is usually difficult, if not impossible, to get them to move away, to make way for a character that can make better use of the position, so Scarabs can be a major double-edged sword in raids, given that their flying traits and movement of 4 easily permits them to get to wherever they want. In almost every case, there are better characters available to use than Aleph, but she still stands out as being a best-in-slot pick against Mortarion, so you'll probably want to build her for the team eventually, if not as a top priority. However, if you are in a rush to push your performance in LREs on a budget, Aleph gives some of the best return on investment of any character in that mode, and you can use her as an interim slot filler in a raid team until you can develop a better raid character that may not be as broadly useful as Aleph in other game modes, such as Trajan. In terms of endgame performance for any other raid team type, Aleph is completely out of the running, so if you are set on going for a multi-hit or Neurophrope team, she can be left at whatever level you need to get through as much of the Indomitus Mirror Elite campaign as you want. Considering how mediocre to bad the other Necrons are, taking Aleph beyond Gold 1 to avoid having to rank them up is perfectly viable, and her being a top tier LRE character means that you can't go wrong with taking her as far as Diamond 3 in the long run. This just shouldn't be a priority as far as raids are concerned. Aleph is not a guaranteed character pull early on, and there are no passive sources of her character shards in-game, but at a base rarity of uncommon, she can be farmed very quickly, and you should not delay doing so either. Now on to the next character, which is Rayvas. Rayvas is not a campaign character, but is readily available to all players and generally should not be overlooked just because of this mark against her name. She is a great early multi-hit damage dealer when combined with Eldrron in that she deals 9 hits per attack, which she is able to buff. Her active abilities Supercharged Overwatch can help clear out boss adds and summons as necessary, and her 2 shield drones also have the potential to keep bosses locked in place if you position her carefully. Unlike other summons, as long as you don't have other tower units on your team, the shield drones will prioritise staying within 2 hexes of Rayvas when she's alive, meaning they're easy to prevent from hogging high ground, unlike many other summons that can't be directed in such a simple way. An unfortunate downside to them is that they deal very meagre damage with just 1 hit per attack, so they do not interact well with buffers such as Eldrron. There's no real way of making them hit hard, but sometimes trapping a boss with them is more important than their ability to hurt it, so don't discount them right away. Rayvas also stands out as being a great character in Arena and Guild War, where her active ability allows her to punch above her weight, and her drones also act as distractions to enemy AI, giving your characters a bit of breathing space to avoid being killed. This will stand you in good stead early on, but you will generally find as you progress up through the arena ranks that more and more people have counters to her on their teams. Relying too heavily on her active ability can be setting yourself up to fail unless you are very careful about which teams you play against, if there's a good choice, and how you use her. Last but not least, she is one half of a power couple in LREs, where her mechanical and big target traits allow her to be healed by, and also provide protection from multi-hit ranged attacks to Aleph Null. These 2 characters can often push close to the end of an LRE track by themselves once upgraded high enough. Getting Rayvas to D3 is a luxury, but she is one of the few characters I still took that far despite her not being raid meta viable, purely for her utility elsewhere in the game, especially LREs. Despite her positives in the early raid meta, she is no good later on as part of a multi-hit team, simply thanks to the fact that she is a ranged attacker, whilst the meta revolves around melee characters. She is not entirely useless as part of a mechanical raid team, but is niche at best and can be safely ignored in favour of the top picks for that team. That being said, like Aleph, if you are focused more on LRE performance than raid performance, her strength in LREs combined with her passable usefulness in a mechanical raid team means she can be upgraded as a priority without too many regrets, if that's the raid team you're going for. If you want to run a multi-hit team, justifying building her beyond Epic Gold 1 is hard until much further down the line of your roster development. Now on to my final character I'll be talking about, which is Ithana. Out of all the characters I've recommended here, I've saved Ithana for last because she's the one I'm most lukewarm on. In fact, I'd not have much reason to include her at all if it wasn't for the issue of Ghazghkull being a boss that you are unable to use both Snotflogger and Golgorts against. I've only given 6 character recommendations up to this point, so you'd be a man down in that fight without a 7th option to fall back on. She is the character I've chosen to take you up to 5 team members. Why Ifana? A few reasons, the first being that you're able to earn on average 2.5 of her shards daily from completing your daily missions. This means that you'll naturally accumulate plenty of her shards over time without needing to specifically devote energy or onslaughts towards farming them. She's also easy to unlock, being an uncommon character that you receive 40 shards for in an early scripted requisition drop. Thinking in terms of endgame play, Ifana will be one of the characters you'll want to get to Blue Wings Legendary in order to sell her excess shards in the Rogue Trader store, as these can be exchanged for valuable resources such as Codices of War. Ascending her up through the rarities ultimately isn't a waste of resources like it might be for some bad characters whose shards you are unable to earn passively. Another reason is, of course, her raid performance in and of itself being decent both at low level and also later on in the game, though I certainly wouldn't call her top meta for multi-hit teams nowadays. Even where she does perform well against a Rogal Dawn tank, the Admech team is a better option, and she can be passed up there in favour of Shosil or Trajan, both of whom are more useful characters at the end game, and I think in general too. Ifana provides an aura buff via her passive ability, which improves the base damage of all characters within 2 hexes by a modest amount, maxing out at plus 400 at level 50, or 44% of what Eldrron provides, and it also increases crit chance. Realistically, this crit chance increase doesn't make a whole lot of difference most of the time, but there is one boss fight where it will perform very well, against a Rogal Dawn tank. The crit chance of your characters is increased by up to 50% when striking the rear armour of the Rogal Dawn tank. Not only is this vital for providing extra damage against it, but scoring crits also prevents any characters with a pierce ratio under 60% from having to punch through the boss's armour stat 3 times over, as well as disabling its Overwatch ability. Characters that are able to equip a crit item and a crit booster top out at 40% crit chance, whilst those that can only equip a crit item top out at 35% crit chance. There are some exceptions to that, such as the Tyranids and Custodes, but I won't get into that. Most of the time it's 35% crit chance with a pistol type item. Ifana's boost to crit chance combined with the tank's weak rear armour can bring the crit chance of your characters to over 100% when attacking the boss, guaranteeing devastating crit chains against it. There is also some nice synergy between Ifana and Eldrron if you're using them together, as both of their passives give additional damage to Eldari units. Some final positive things to mention about Ifana are her high mobility, and also her damage aura being able to direct the movement of summons. Summons like to deal the maximum possible damage they can, and so will prefer to stand within her aura over being outside of it, all other things being equal. This can be used to pull them out of the line of fire of a boss, or to clear a space for a character, for example. Unfortunately for Ifana, she is quite frail with an extremely lackluster active ability, and does not have much use outside of raids despite being a required campaign character. Though you will eventually accumulate enough of her shards to take her to Legendary and Blue Star status beyond that, I wouldn't be in any hurry to ascend her beyond Epic or build her past Gold 1, as this is essentially enough to see you through the Simhan Elite campaign. Now, just the final thing to get onto, Machines of War. I've devoted a lot of time to talking about characters here, but Machines of War can also have a huge impact on the outcomes of your boss battles. Instead of me yammering on for too long, I'll provide a link in the script and in a pinned comment to Nandi's video entitled Machines of War in 2025 Updated Guide, which I think does a good job of taking you through what you need to know about all of the current Machines of War except for the most recent release, The Exorcist. If you want a too long didn't watch breakdown on them from me, I recommend the Biovore for early play due to the fact it is used to manipulate boss movement, which can be vital for exploiting high ground against them. It is great at distracting AI-controlled units in Arena and Guild War, and it requires zero investment to provide the majority of its benefits to the player. The Forge Fiend, Galatian, and the Exorcist are good specialist options for the multi-hit / Neurothrope, Mechanical, and Neurothrope raid teams respectively, but do require some investment into their abilities for them to be really useful. If you want an idea of how worthwhile they are outside of raids, I'll again encourage you to watch Nandi's video, as it's not my intention to go into great detail about them here. As a general rule for raids, Machines of War that simply deal damage don't tend to be very useful, whereas those that can be used to manipulate boss position, the Biovore and Galatian, kill boss summons, the Biovore, Galatian and Forge Fiend, and augment the damage output of your key damage dealing characters, Exorcist and Galatian. They will be the best ones to use. Further considerations are how few resources are required to make them viable, how fast they eat through your supply of munitions, and what kind of badges you are able to farm from their incursions, as generally you'll be short of Imperial badges, and so having an extra source for them is welcome. That's a very quick and dirty rundown of general things to look for in Machines of War, and I also have it written up here. And I think I will now leave this video here. I may continue this as a series where I take a look at the endgame meta raid teams, but for now, this is it.